This is Locally Sourced Spirituality with John Paul, encouraging sustainable and organic spiritual practices. You don't have to go anywhere to find the holy. It's right under your feet.
Hello, everybody. This is Locally Sourced Spirituality, and I am John Paul. And this is episode 7, Holy Days. I'm working from the premise that God is always with us, that the divine is always present. And how do we recognize it? How do we interact? How do we live within that understanding and that reality? There's a passage in the Bible that says that we should pray without ceasing. And that's great, and that's an awesome idea, but to be able to pray without ceasing, to be able to pray without stopping, you have to first learn how to pray at particular times. You have to learn to live a life of prayer, of setting aside time, of making it a part of who you are. And then over time, then you understand what prayer is, and you get into a rhythm, and then you understand that it is possible to pray at all times without ceasing. But today I want to talk about holy days. Now, the concept of a holy day is the same thing. God is in everything. God is everywhere. God fills all things. But before we can really recognize that, I think we need to set aside the days, particular days, and celebrate them and focus our attention. Just like we learn how to focus our prayer at particular times, we need to take the days that are set aside and let them be tools for us for our awareness of God's presence in our world. Now, this past Monday was Memorial Day in the United States. And on Memorial Day, people do all sorts of different things. But that's a day of remembering those who have lost their lives in the armed forces. My Memorial Day, I spent it with my family. I went to church on Sunday. And then after worship, the family and I packed up our van and we drove to a place that we love, a place of rest, a place that we call the cabin. And we love that place. Part of what I love about it is because we have terrible cell phone reception. It's a place that's surrounded by trees and a short walk to a lake that we can swim in. It's on a dirt road that really leads to nowhere, so there's not a lot of traffic. It's quiet. It's as close to nature as you get without crossing the line into camping. Now, I used to like camping. I don't do much camping anymore. Back a couple of decades ago, I was in the Army Reserves and in the Michigan Army National Guard, and I spent a lot of time sleeping on the ground and in tents, and I've really kind of had enough of that. And what I like to do, I like to get up early on mornings when we're at the cabin, because usually my kids stay up late, and so they'll tend to sleep in a bit. So I'll get up, and I'll make coffee, and I'll go out on the front porch and just listen to the sounds. And I recorded about 3 minutes of it. I'm going to share about 30 seconds of what I heard with you. Just bear with me and just be with me as I'm sitting there drinking my coffee in the silence of the morning on Memorial Day this past Monday. The cabin is near a town where there's a cemetery that has about 6 generations of my family members in it. The cabin is situated in an area where some of my ancestors, I guess, 6 generations ago, came from New York, Pennsylvania, and they settled here in Michigan. And both sides of my family, my mom and my dad, have generations going back in this area. So this place that I go back to is very much, I'm very connected to the geography. And it just feels like home when I'm there. And being a pastor, I move from here to there, and I never really have a lot of roots where I am. But that is my go-to place where I do have roots. Now, I've mentioned before that I'm being moved to a new church. I'm a pastor, and I'm here in West Michigan. I'm on the coast of Lake Michigan, in just outside of Ludington, Michigan, and I'm in less than a month, I'm going to be living in a very different place in Lansing, Michigan. I'm going to be moving from a rural setting to an urban ministry setting in just a short amount of time, and I'm in that transition, and that cabin, that place, is going to be a good spot for me and my family in the transition. So we took our Memorial Day holiday, and I want to talk about the sacredness or the holiness of secular holidays. Now, when I was in school, there was a preaching teacher that insisted that we never preach a sermon on things like Memorial Day or Mother's Day because they are not Christian. And I deeply disagree, because that idea puts our faith in a box. It says that there is your faith life, your Christian life, in this box, and then there's your secular life, your other life, in another box, and the two are separate. When that's far from the truth. The two should be there shouldn't be two. It's one seamless life, because God is in everything. God flows through everything. And we live in a society, if you live here in the United States, we live in a society that we decided that no matter what religion you are, no matter what faith tradition you come from, or no faith tradition, that there's days that we've set aside that are special to our culture. And we've set aside Memorial Day to remember those who have fought for our country and gave everything, that they lost their lives. And they deserve to be honored. We've also set aside several other holidays. We set aside Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a holiday, because he set ideals, because he exemplified good things that we as a culture value. We set aside Thanksgiving Day, a day to be thankful for what we have, and that's a good thing. Those are holy things, no matter what tradition you're from. So we set aside these particular days, and these are good if we're a person that is spiritual and is seeking and looking to connect with God. These are good entry points, because they don't have a lot of baggage. They don't have a lot of extra things attached to them like different religions have with their holidays. And we take Christmas, for example. I love Christmas. Christmas to me is wonderful. It's the birth of Jesus Christ. It's the coming of God and flesh to the earth, and it's just a wonderful thing. But you know what? I have a Muslim friend who celebrates the season of Christmas. They get a Christmas tree. They buy gifts. They have a loving family. But they don't really connect it with the birth of Christ. So in this culture, there's a way to celebrate holidays. There's a variety of ways to approach holidays, and not your particular way has to be the same as another person's way. There's no one standard way to set aside a day and to celebrate it. If you are recognizing the holy in a day, you do it the way that you understand that day to be. The way that you connect it. The way that you can connect your everyday life to the eternal. That's what you should do. Now, if Memorial Day is, of course, about remembering those who died in military service. Now, I doubt that's the majority. In fact, everyone I've ever talked to that has served in the military didn't serve because they were so enamored with the foreign policy of their government at the time, that they wanted to get behind that foreign policy and enact it through force. Every person that I've ever talked to that's a veteran that has served in the armed forces of the United States served for one of two reasons. One, because they're drafted, and two, and these aren't exclusive, they could be both. But the second reason is because they love their country and they love their family and they love their community and they wanted to do what they could do to protect those things. And so we set aside this day for our brothers and sisters who made that decision to serve our country and didn't get to come home. They sacrificed everything. And what they've done is that they've touched the eternal, because they laid their lives down for home and for country and for family. And those are things that everyone can connect to. Those are fruits that we all can harvest. The traditional thing to do on Memorial Day is to go and to decorate the graves of fallen soldiers and to honor them. But also there's another normal thing to do, and that's to go on vacation and take advantage of the 3-day weekend. Now, one of those things seems good and right and proper. That one seems maybe it's a little more selfish. Maybe and maybe not. It's good to honor those that have fallen. And do they deserve to be honored? Yes, they do, because the memory of them should be preserved. Because when we lay down our lives for those that we love, we touch the eternal. But then we have to ask ourselves, and this isn't a criticism at all, it's just some self-awareness. Who is the audience of our efforts when we are decorating a grave? And it depends on our view of the afterlife. Is our audience the person that is fallen? Are we trying to connect the person who has died? Is our audience God, the divine? Is our audience the people that might pass by and see the gravestone? Is our audience ourselves? Are we giving ourselves comfort? And all these things are fine. All these things are legitimate. And there might even be more reasons to do this than I've listed. But what's our view of the afterlife? I talked to some of the kids in church this past Sunday about what it was like when in the Bible there's a story about Jesus taking his disciples out of Jerusalem to the little town of Bethany, and he was taken from them and he ascended. He was taken into heaven. And I said, what do you think that means? What does that look like? What do you think happened? And a lot of the kids shared what they thought that meant. They thought maybe it was a foggy day that day. And then some said maybe it was angels came down and lifted him up. And some said that he was walking on clouds. And they all had this idea of what it was in their mind. And each of them brought those images with them to the story. So when I read the story, that's what's going on inside their minds. And then they react to the story in their own way because they have their own vision of what the reality of that was. One little boy even said a van came by and picked him up. So how does that inform the rest of the story? How does that describe, or how does that shape one's understanding of what is happening in the story after that? And so we have to understand what shapes us. What is it that we believe about what happens after we die, and how does that shape our understanding of what we do? There's a movie that I love. I love all the Kung Fu Panda movies, but Kung Fu Panda 3, there's a notion that they illustrate about the spirit world. When there's a death, that you move into the spirit world, and it's mostly separate, but there's a possibility of moving back and forth through the two realms between the spirit realm and the earthly realm. And this is also in another animated series, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Aang, the main character, can go into a meditative state and go into the spirit world. Do we understand death like that? Do we understand that when we die, that our loved ones, our family members, our friends move into a sort of spirit world, a sort of parallel world to our own? I mean, this is sort of reinforced by that show on TLC, the Long Island Medium, where what's her name, Teresa Caputo, she claims to speak to the dead. So are they just right here next to us in another dimension? Is that your understanding of the afterlife? In the New Testament, in Hebrews 12, it's in verse 1, it talks about a cloud of witnesses, about all the people that have gone before us. And when they use the word witnesses, it's like they're still there. They're still watching. So is this reinforcing this idea that those who have gone before us are still around us? In which case, when we go to decorate a gravestone, someone that we love, or we go and visit them and they're watching, and then we could be honoring them directly. And is it that they're only at the grave site? Does the spirits only hang around where we place their physical remains? Or is that just a reminder of them, or a place where we can go to place the things that give us that connection that we have no matter where we are? And so we have a particular place, a grave site, to put flowers, to plant a flag, to remember, and to speak. And we hope and we believe that they hear us and they know that we love them. And we can speak to them anywhere, but it's in this particular place that we do this. And it's the same idea as a holy day. We set aside a particular day, even though God is with us every day. It's the same as holy space. We go to pilgrimages and we go to churches and we say these are holy spaces. And we set aside spaces, but we know that God is with us everywhere. I think these are shortcuts so that for our minds, so that we can learn how to interact with God in particular times and spaces, so that then we can grow up and start to see God in every time and in every space. But then there's a view of death that there is nothing after life. That when our body systems fail, that the person that we are ceases to be. Now, I was listening to Rob Bell's podcast this past Tuesday, because of course I was on vacation on Monday, and his usually comes out on Monday. And he was talking about it's not his idea, but he's explaining it, the idea of an emergent phenomenon, how when there's like things come together, they can form something new that has a characteristic unto itself that the individual elements don't have. And he used the example of a flock of birds and the group mindset, like the starlings when they come together, that they'll move and shift in the air, and it's almost as if the flock has a mind of its own, and that you wouldn't find the thought process individually in each bird of fly left, fly right. Likewise, our bodies are made up of cells and atoms and things, and not one of those elements within us has the personality, has the spirit of who we are, but altogether we become who we are. So that's called an emergent phenomenon. And maybe some people believe that once the individual parts die, that there is no longer the person. And so what does that mean for the afterlife? That means that when it's over, it's over. And so what does a person like that do on Memorial Day? What does that understanding look like? And so you go and you remember the phenomenon that was that person as an example for the rest of us, perhaps. You see, we have this holiday, this Memorial Day, and these other holidays as an anchor point, as a symbol, as something that gives us a reminder of what's important. And those symbols, the symbols that we have to have meaning when we first look at them, at our first glance. If they don't have meaning, then they're not effective. When I was a kid, there was Arbor Day. I didn't know what the word arbor meant. So what does that mean to me? So it's just a word on the calendar. If we don't teach ourselves, if we don't teach our children what things mean, then they won't be able to use the symbols in the way that's meaningful to them. At church, I have this through the season of Easter, I have on the chancel area a grave to represent the grave where Jesus was laid after he was crucified, and where he was resurrected. And I have surrounding this, it's made out of like styrofoam that I painted. It looks like a cave, and around it I have some fake pine trees, and I have a fake ficus, and I have ferns. I have all sorts of different things, none of which I don't think are native to Israel where the historical event happened. And someone pointed it out to me a few weeks ago. It was almost a criticism that I was being historically inaccurate. And I explained to this person that, yes, it's not accurate for a couple of reasons. One, because these are the materials that I have to work with. But I wanted to make a depiction of that space using symbols that told a story. I had a deciduous tree, a tree that loses its leaves, and I had a evergreen. Shows the seasons of life, the cycle of life emerging, life dying, and then the rebirth of life in the deciduous tree. And I have the evergreen tree that symbolizes eternal life. It's always green. It's always flourishing. And those two stories come together in Jesus Christ. So it was a commentary. It was a statement about who I believe Jesus to be. So no, it was not an accurate depiction of a historical event, but it was a true depiction according to what I understood. And the problem is that the symbols that I used weren't immediately obvious. This man thought I was trying to make a historic depiction. I was trying to make a spiritual depiction, and he didn't get it, so it wasn't effective. Now let's go back to Kung Fu Panda, but the first movie. In the first movie, the master, the sage Oogway, had a scene where he had a final teaching with the main character Po, and he was dying. But then the way he died is that he was just sort of taken away by a flourish of peach petals from peach blossoms. And before that, you see that the peach blossoms and the peach fruit were on a tree that they were sitting under. And that doesn't happen, right? Peach blossoms come, and then later the fruit comes. They're not on the tree at the same time. So this was a statement about being outside of time, about being in the eternal. And there's a story in the Bible that's similar to that. Well, there's the ascension of Jesus, which is like, I think what the Kung Fu Panda movie was mimicking in Oogway's scene when he was taken away. But also in the Old Testament, there is Aaron's rod. Aaron was, right there with Moses, and the rod that he threw down and turned into a snake, and he picked it up again. Well, that rod later on blossomed with almond blossoms, and it also had the ripe fruit of almonds. So that in that moment, when we read that in the Bible, that there's blossoms and the ripe fruit, it's almost like that's a space where it's out of time, that it's touching eternity, that the presence of God, the presence of the eternal is right there. So it's a powerful symbol to say something else. And so we read the Bible, and we read about Jesus being taken to heaven, Jesus' ascension into heaven. And this story about Jesus' ascension is about the earthly and the eternal being united. That this one who laid down his life for us and defeated death is now permanently in heaven. So we have this permanent connection, this permanent bridge to the eternal through Jesus. And we can try to explain that. We can try to make that concrete. We can think about that in terms like children do, like, did a van come and pick them up? Or we can just rest in the mystery of that and know that the eternal is with us no matter where we go. And we can use those symbols. We can use holy days like Christmas and Easter and Pentecost. But then we can use secular holidays, which is a funny term because it's just secular holy days, like Memorial Day and Labor Day and Thanksgiving and Arbor Day. And we can use those as reminders of the eternal, of how we're connected. So how is it with you today? How do you inhabit eternity in your temporal space? Do this. Make a plan to do something that feeds your spirit, something that you want to do, something that makes you feel complete. Talk to you next time.
Music is provided by Bleed the Water. Check them out on Facebook. Graphic design by Holly Pole Photography. Go to hollypolephotography.com. This has been a John Pole production.